And yes, now it is my great pleasure to introduce someone who doesn't need an introduction, but I'm going to do it anyway. Dr. Jen Hastings is clinical professor at the UCSF Department of Family and Community Medicine. Jen has been part of the medical community in Santa Cruz since 1998, initially with Planned Parenthood developing the transgender healthcare program both locally and nationally. Jen continues to teach and consult in the area of transgender health. Locally, Dr. Hastings supports the work of SafeRx and the Health Improvement Partnership and is engaged in many aspects of medical and behavioral health in Santa Cruz. Dr. Hastings has been involved with the Calciano Symposium in several different roles since 2009, including presenter, moderator, and CME consultant. Jen has also been on the Calciano Symposium Advisory Board since 2019 and will be our moderator for this session. Thank you so much, Dr. Hastings.
Thank you so much. So this is a traditional part of our Calciano, which is that we get to have time to talk with our presenters, ask and have them answer questions. We also today are featuring two extraordinary people, Jeffrey and Niku. And we're going to have Jeffrey first. Am I pronouncing your name close? Good. You can make it even better in a moment. Yeah. So I'm going to introduce Jeffrey, and then he will share a little bit, and then I'll introduce Niku. And then thanks for all your questions. I'll be juggling those and integrating them so that we can have a nice panel. So Jeffrey Samael Mata Diaz is a Cabrillo College student who's currently in the Rising Scholars Program. And Jeffrey explained that that is a special program for formerly incarcerated students and system of care folk to get support. Thank you so much for being here. So I just so appreciate you being here today with us to share some of your story, and then people can bring up questions if you have additional. But if you would take the mic and share your story with us. Thank you so much.
So, my story, it started when I was 7 years old, you could say. I came into this country, learning a new language, adapting to new cultures. Everything was different for me. So growing up for me, the struggles that I faced as a kid, right? Not having a father figure there for me, you know, my mom raising me by herself. All I knew was fight fire with fire. So that's how most of my teenage years were like. At an early age, I got into the criminal justice system, and it all started with a fight on campus. Since the age of 16 to the age of 24, I have been in the criminal justice system. I'm not 24 anymore, I'm 27, so. I'm off parole for 3 years successfully. But it's been very hard. It's been very hard to integrate back into society, facing all the challenges that we formerly incarcerated and system impacted students face, especially regarding mental health. You know, if I may, just speaking on my experience at Cabrillo and taking on the leadership position of a student trustee, not only that, but being the president of the Rising Scholars Club on campus, and as well as many other leadership positions on campus, none of it would be possible without the people that are there and the supports that are provided to me. I've struggled with the imposter syndrome just because I'm not used to seeing people that look like me, right, or students that look like me in positions that I am in, or in places that I am not normally found in. So learning to adjust to that and to accept my new identity has been really hard. You know, I often before. It's 12:01. I don't know how many can relate. It's 12 midnight, 1 o'clock. You know, some of us are still doing homework or work or finishing up an essay or something. And then you about to clock out, knowing that you got to wake up at 6 in the morning, hit the gym again. It's really hard. Sometimes I often ask myself, like, why am I doing this? You know? And I have to remind myself every night because I'm worthy of it. I think it's important for all of us to recognize that sometimes when people see me, right, they don't see my pain. They don't see the struggle. And maybe you can kind of feel it a little bit with my voice. And I try not to, because when you're speaking, you want to take the emotions out of it, right? But I think in this particular moment, I want you guys to feel my pain. It's very hard trying to be a student at Cabrillo College, knowing that you're formerly incarcerated and system impacted, knowing that you got 2 kids, 1 on the way. It's difficult to manage, right? And then working on campus, holding a leadership position on campus. It's all very difficult, but very doable at the same time. You know, when people look at me and see me, you're doing too much, you're juggling too much. Why? Because they're not used to seeing someone of my character, of my ability, of my background, doing the things that I'm doing. And oftentimes I feel discouraged when I hear, are you sure you're not doing too much? Are you sure you're biting off too much? Are you sure you can handle it? I mean, I'm doing it right now, can't you see? Right? If there's anything that I would want anyone in here to take away is that sometimes it's that happiest person in the room, that person making everyone's day, that may feel the loneliest. So whenever you see someone like that, just ask yourself, is he really happy or is he lonely? Maybe try to take the time to approach them and ask them how they're doing, get to know them, because that's what he's looking for, or they're looking for someone just to hear them. Just, that's all I want to say to you guys.
Thank you. Thank you so much. And I really appreciate you being here and sharing your words. So I'm going to pivot to Niku. Thank you for joining us. Niku is a senior in high school. And your passion, Niku, lies in enhancing the mental well-being of youth and of their communities. Niku is the founder and executive director of Unite, a youth mental health organization dedicated to reducing mental health stigma and enhancing emotional resilience in youth. So we'd love to hear some words from you. Thank you.
Thank you. First of all, I'd like to say that it's truly an honor and privilege to be here. I feel very heard and validated, and I think it's so important to put youth at the forefront of these conversations. We're in a youth mental health crisis. Youth is in the name of this very crisis, so it's imperative to include us in the conversation, so I'm very appreciative of this opportunity. My name is Niku. My pronouns are she, her, hers, and growing up, I've almost always known that I wanted to become a psychotherapist. And that's because I've just always been immersed in mental health and in the mental health sector. Both of my parents, who were which immigrants, both struggle with mental illness. And I remember as a young child, I would follow them to their therapy sessions and wonder, what is this doctor that just talks to you and helps you feel better? And of course, it's more nuanced than that, but as a talkative, curious child, when I first heard about this idea that there was someone who could just talk to you and help my parents feel better, I knew that's what I wanted to be, and that's still what I want to do. And over time, this has evolved into a more nuanced aspiration. Again, post-COVID, I think all of us were hit in our own unique ways. But as a high school student who experienced all of my 8th grade and freshman year of high school at home, doing online school, Zoom learning, it felt very isolating, and I could just see the youth mental health crisis. I could witness it in my peers, in my friends, in my family. I remember my freshman year of high school, which was all online. We received a flood of emails from the school district that's just read, it's with great loss that another student has passed away due to suicide. And more of those emails would come up. And I just thought to myself, we're losing peers, we're losing friends, we're losing our community members, and nothing was really being done to make any change. And my sophomore year of high school, when I returned to in-person school, still nothing was being done to make change. I thought that the conversation around mental health was very minimal, and it was sort of swept under the rug in my community. And so, feeling very helpless, I just thought to myself, if no one's going to change anything, why not be that change? And that's what I've been trying to do ever since. Thank you. It was around this time that I also founded my organization, Unite, which is all about destigmatizing mental health and combating this youth mental health crisis. And although this is a very aspirational goal, I think at the very core of it, Unite, which means unity in French, is all about fostering community. Mental health, it's such a universal experience. It's a shared experience. Every one of us has it. All of us get sick. All of us have our challenges. We feel happy. We feel sad. And I think the very fact that it's so universal, yet so stigmatized, just brings a lot of opportunity to this field of study in general. For me, at Unite and beyond, my goal is to cultivate this universal experience, to kind of thread this needle through all of us and bring us together. Mental health doesn't discriminate based on race, age, sexual identity, et cetera, et cetera. And I think because of its universality, we can use it, we can hone it, and we can foster community and belonging, which is what we're all here to do. So that's a little bit about my story. Thank you so much.
Thank you. And if people, I do have specific questions for Niku and Jeffrey, but if more, you are welcome to continue bringing them up and bring them to Karen. Okay. So there's a question for both of you, and maybe Jeffrey, I'll have you answer it first. When you haven't felt as connected to those around you, and certainly we all know that feeling, what has been helpful to you in dealing with this or overcoming that feeling of disconnection?
So for me, whenever I feel distressed, anxiety, or challenged, or like I'm running away from something, which is I'm so used to doing, I reach out. I reach out for help. I've been very fortunate enough to, I don't know if it's just me or the environment, the culture, the energy at Cabrillo, but whether I'm working with a staff or I'm with a student, I feel very comfortable in opening up however I'm feeling. Would you mind repeating the question again for me?
When you're feeling disconnected, what have you done to help that feeling? And
wow, perfect timing. Sorry, that was my mom.
Gotta go, right?
That was my mom. So, when I feel disconnected, I get back in tune. First, okay, she's not gonna do it. Sorry about that. First, I get back in tune with myself, what's going on with me, kind of like an inventory check of myself. And then after I reach out to those people who are my support systems, and for example, in my case would be my Senate advisor, my department, head of department, my coordinator for the Rising Scholars, it could be a fellow Rising Scholar. But whenever I do feel disconnected, I inventory check myself, then I reach out and I ventilate, because I do not like to bottle things in, because lately I've been finding myself in the bathroom, little tears on the way home, put some music on, and I've been making a habit out of it, habitualizing, just kind of having those little mental breakdowns. I ask other people, do you have them? Do you have them? Yes, it's normal, it's part of life. Okay, I need to get used to them, I guess. But knowing that, so whenever I do feel some sort of disconnection or just lack of energy or just like I'm not heard or anything, I just reach out. I make my voice heard. That's what I do.
Beautiful. Thank you. Niku, I want to ask you the same question, if you'd be so kind.
Yeah, just piggybacking off of what Jeffrey mentioned, I think that it's so easy to feel disconnected, especially with social media and all of that. I think there's so much opportunity to feel loneliness, but that opportunity can also translate to our ability to find connection and community. What really helps me is to not shy away from the isolation, but really reflect upon it and become aware of it. I don't push it away, but I recognize that it's there. And I think what's been super helpful and instrumental to my mental health is finding a very solid support system, as you mentioned as well. And I think this can be as simple as one person. It can be my mom, it can be my best friend. But just having that shoulder to lean on really helps me kind of come out of just recognizing my loneliness and actively searching for that connection and that community.
Thank you so much. And those were questions specific to our young people, but I'm tempted to ask Mina and Julie, what do you each do when you feel disconnected? You want to start, Mina? I think it goes on by itself.
All right. Thank you. Well, there's a lot of different practices, but I think for me, just a main practice when I'm feeling disconnected is to just remind myself I'm not alone. And for me, first, that's an internal thing of just tuning inwards and connecting with, taking refuge in something greater. Kind of coming back to, just from a personal perspective, my spiritual practice is a real foundation for melting a sense of disconnection and finding meaning in challenging moments. So that's first and foremost. And then various practices, to just help soothe any disconnection or soothe anything that might be arising, and to not try and control it, but to understand it. So maybe I'll just kind of just share, whenever a strong emotion or a feeling of disconnection arises, just the first step for me is to just kind of like an inventory check, but just recognize what's arising, just recognizing it. And then to not fight it. And of course, this is challenging in the busyness of our day-to-day lives, but this can even be a micro practice of like, all right, well, can I just, instead of trying to control it, just recognize what's arising, accept that it's happening, and that it's impermanent, that I'm not gonna always feel this way, that it will pass. And then to look deeply at it, to really try and understand, well, let me really identify what I'm feeling, why I might be feeling that. And I'm a student of Marshall Rosenberg's nonviolent communication. And so for me, for those of you that are familiar with that, a lot of it is, the way we're feeling is based on a met or unmet need. So is there a particular need that is being met or not met in this moment? And then to find a way to offer myself some self-compassion or nurturing, and just wait for some intuitive guidance and wisdom on what the next possible best step is. And then, of course, having a support system and community is really vital too. But just for me, and the way I kind of like to do my own internal check, and then connect with a loved one or a friend if I need additional support.
Thank you. Okay. I find naming it helps. Naming when I'm, feeling isolated, alone. The answer I don't want to give, but is true, is I overeat. But I mean, here's the reality. There's people who shop, people do different things when you feel uncomfortable feelings. So, and I do reach out for help and support. If it's a friend, if it's my sweetheart.
Thank you. So I have it's actually interesting, several variations on a question that is kind of inspired by what you said, I believe, Jeffrey, that you've had people say you're doing too much and that actually doesn't feel supportive. So I have two questions that are kind of connected. So I'm trying to summarize this really good question. So someone who's working with someone who is getting that kind of feedback, so his current supports can't relate to how hard he's working, and they say he's doing too much and that he should quit. So what kind of support would you want from those people instead of saying that you're doing too much?
First and foremost, if you feel like you're not being empowered or supported, I think you need to state that. I think you need to open up, because people are not gonna know what you're feeling if you don't speak up. And I know it's hard, especially for me, when I have a Caucasian man of power or authority, and I'm like, right? But no, we have to not be afraid. Doesn't matter if it's a superior, supervisor, especially when you're trying to seek growth and you're trying to learn and you're trying to excel. Those things, I feel like they're not conducive, because they only make you want to second guess yourself. So if you're not getting that type of support system, I think trying to find this somewhere else, or if that's not possible, I would talk, just open communication, and tell them how you feel. I guarantee that when you tell someone how you feel, I mean, if they continue acting like that towards you, then that's something within themselves.
Thank you. And I'll say that this whole dialogue around saying that you're, making the comment that you're doing too much, I confess that I have done that. So it's really, thank you. And then a variation on the question, which really anyone who wants to answer can. How do you feel connected to your support people when they don't support you, and how do you find people that can support you?
I want to say that everyone in my life has been supportive of my work in the mental health space, but that's simply a lie. I wish. And I think there's great intentions from my loved ones, and I think when I see people not being supportive just because the name of the field is mental health, and that's something we don't talk about, I think that's an issue. That's a deeply rooted societal issue, and it's called stigma. And that's something that we need to combat. So when I get comments like that about people hesitating, maybe not validating my achievements just because it seems unimportant to them, I'm just reminded of how much work there's left to do and how important my work is. That's just evidence for me. That's just fuel to the fire. And I think viewing it, spinning it through that kind of positive lens really helps me, because it doesn't always feel great when loved ones kind of say these backhanded comments, or it doesn't, you want people by your side, but I think they are by my side. They just do it in their own unique way. And for me, what that looks like internally is just seeing the positives in it and trying to open discourse with them. Why is this an unimportant topic? And if that's not going anywhere, then I just persist, and I maybe skew the direction of my conversations to people that are supportive of me and my goals. I think regardless of who's around you, if you have a solid support system of 1, 2, or 3 people who really understand where you're coming from and the value of your work, then the external chatter is, you can really dial it down and push it away a little bit.
Thank you. So, Mina, this might be for you, changing direction just a tad. And this is different from the one I showed you, is the research on resilience and increased cortical thickness that you mentioned with Dr. Lisa Miller, I believe, about connection to spiritual life, is that, do you think, true with any kind of deep connection, like connection with family or community?
Yeah, because I think it has to do with where you find meaning, purpose, and love. And this word, it's funny during the break, like this word spiritual is so loaded, right? And I think what Lisa Miller is trying to do is normalize like a secular spirituality where we can just show up in our wholeness and our fullness, and which is why I think she's trying to use this language of like natural spirituality. And I think really all it is an invitation to welcome the fullness of who we are, and recognizing that we all have different pathways for healing and connection and resilience. And for some, it might be a faith tradition. For some, it might be like the cycling group, but they're getting community, they're making meaning, there's connection. So, I would just also say that if you're curious about that video, the book, The Awakened Brain, is really wonderful to look at, and there's a lot of studies and stories, because, it's the stories that I think are really powerful. And so, I think there's a number of pathways to this resilience. I think her particular research is around us having a connection with something greater than ourselves. And however you want to interpret that is up to you. It could be the ocean, as I look out to the beautiful ocean, right? It's sort of like the mystery, the awe, the something larger than the individual.
That's beautiful. Thank you. So there are a lot of questions on the theme of how do I integrate mindfulness and compassion and other concepts into the classroom, or give examples. I think you did give some examples of hands-on techniques, but in particular, someone said that I can use on Monday. So, it's almost asking you to summarize your 90-minute talk, but go for it. Yeah.
All right, here we go. So the first thing I want to lift up is when I think about bringing mindfulness and compassion into a classroom or school setting, there are kind of 2 important components. One is the teaching of mindfulness and compassion, the explicit instruction, and then the mindful and compassionate teaching, which is the embodiment, right? And we need both. We can't have one without the other if we're really going to support young people. And so just important to recognize that framing, that I think so often we're like, where's the curriculum? Let's go to the curriculum. And also just want to lift up that teachers, fun fact, make more decisions during the course of the workday than any other profession except surgeons. And so there's a lot that the classroom teacher is holding. And I don't want to underestimate or discount the power of the teacher's presence. In fact, there's been, some research around the transmission or the acquisition of social and emotional learning skills, and how that embodiment piece of the educator is sometimes even more important than the explicit instruction. Because if you do the explicit instruction but you don't have the embodiment, there's a dissonance there, right? There's a dissonance that the child can be picking up on. So in terms of practice for Monday, I would say those 3 signature SEL practices are a great way to start. And we, modeled a little optimistic close and modeled some of those practices. And Julie also did that in her offering. And I think just these also micro moments. So even just wait time. Educators, we practice wait time, like use that time to come home and take a few breaths and really touch in and see your students and look at your students. And then in terms of the explicit instruction, there's so much curriculum out there. A lot of it is open source. But before we actually teach that, we have to know where our context is, know our audience, know our students. So I often would do a little practice. I taught middle and high school for several years of just connecting with my own middle school self before I teach. And what that did is it put me in initially an empathetic and hopefully ultimately a more compassionate space where I could really, instead of trying to I'm going to teach these kids, these skills and competencies, it was really coming from this space of connecting with who they are. And, Thich Nhat Hanh was once asked, gosh, you teach to so many different groups and, you lead congressmen around, mindful walking, and you work with veterans, and how do you change what you're teaching to different populations? And his answer is that I try to understand the suffering of those who I'm serving. And so my main takeaway would be just come back to trying to really look into the eyes of the young people and trust that there'll be some guidance there when you connect on that deeper level. And also the community of practice that Wendy talked about goes very specific into specific instructional strategies around bringing this into the classroom. So if that's an interest to you, you can connect with the Santa Cruz County Office of Ed.
Thank you. So this is a similar question, but really looking at more at a systemic level. I'll just read from the question. Teachers work in a broken public education system with high teacher turnover, limited resources, and despite what you just said, not much respect. Please can you review some suggestions about how to change programs and how to increase resiliency? So it's a slightly different tact, and from, I don't know, what would you say?
Well, the first thing I'd say is to just remember that there's more teachers than administrators, and there's more students than teachers than administrators. And I think that real change is not going to really happen from the top. And so to find our tribe and to find our people where we can have, I talked with Michael last night, and he has this term, pockets of hope, within our within the systems that we work. So that would be the first thing. And then I'd also just name that there are some strategic ways to do systemic work. So just speaking from Oakland, and again, this would be like a whole other session, but when we were trying to implement the social emotional learning work, we partnered with the union, and we knew that that was a very important first step, that it couldn't be something that, was like another initiative. And the other thing I want to lift up is that there needs to be more of a conversation around resistance, and the resistance that we might experience when we're trying to bring mindfulness or compassion or social emotional learning to these spaces. And Sometimes the resistance is from a lack of information. Sometimes it's a fear of change. And so we have to have a long view. Like stuff is not going to change tomorrow. But I do believe that kind of breath by breath, step by step, just like that video we watched from my colleague Anne, that one teacher shifting her language, sharing about that with her teaching team, coming together and having their own kind of community of practice in their school and communicating with leadership that change is possible, and it also takes time. And while you're part of that process, to really do whatever you can to tend to your own well-being and resilience and find your community. I mean, both our amazing young people talked about the importance of social support. So when I was a classroom teacher, I had the great good fortune of having like a mindful educator practice group where we would gather weekly and support each other. And we'd see each other at the copy machine, and there would be this sense of connection. And that we have to kind of, we are wired to privilege the negative over the positive and not to discount all the challenges and the brokenness of the system that we're in. But I think it's really important to also cultivate that, expand our resiliency zone as much as we can, to also see the possibility and celebrate those small wins along the way.
Thank you. I think we'll.
One super tangible.
Sure.
So one super tangible thing, I was working with a teacher in a super stressful situation, and essentially often teachers are given sort of the task of, if there's a challenging kid they're working with, find something good that you like about them or that they're doing, right? So I find that teachers don't do that for themselves. And so there was one teacher I was working with where literally the idea was create a place, and every single day you need to capture one good thing you did that day. So like super tangible, but I will tell you that she went from super cynical to, at a certain point, really seeing what she was doing was making a difference and could actually start to see some hope and some patterns. So little teeny idea, but sometimes can make a difference.
Thank you. So this is to both Jeffrey and Niku. What would you change to increase connection of self and others in the world? I know that's just a small, tiny question, right? That's a very broad question. Does that feel too broad? Yeah.
I can try my best to answer this question. I think there's so many layers. It takes so much work when we're, trying to do this globally. But I think in the mental health space, at least, I think something that we learned earlier was the fact that we have to account for our nuanced identities and the layers and how that contributes to our experiences of mental health. At my organization, Unite, I get to work with youth across the nation and across 23 different countries now, and bringing youth together in this way with all of their diversity just kind of illuminated how important it is to account for this diversity in the care that we receive. And so I think socially and culturally competent mental health care is critical to this feeling of connection that we have when we reach out for support. Reaching out isn't easy all the time. There's so many barriers. There's accessibility, there's stigma, there's shame. And for youth to, jump over that obstacle, reach out for support, but not feel heard is a really terrible thing. And so I think by accounting for this diversity, by being more culturally and socially responsive, we can cultivate just a little bit more of this sense of connection on a more intergenerational level.
So I think for me, right, being a part of the Senate, one of our goals is always to create community and unite the student population. It's hard sometimes trying to create community when people are all in their own worlds, just from class to their cars and home, right? It's hard. But I think I'm a strong believer that if you ever want to see change, it all starts with policy. So if we ever want to see a more connected community, society, right, we have to start talking about mental health at an earlier stage. Whether it's elementary schools and kids are now becoming aware of their own mental health issues and providing more resources on campus or school grounds. And also making this mental health crisis more visible, more transparent, putting it more out there so people are feeling empowered or welcome to speak up and create that connection. That's what I would say.
Thank you. And I know Michael Painter's here from the COE, and I know that I'll say it as a we, because Santa Cruz County Office of Education, we're all touching that in some way, or most of us are, to have wellness centers in the schools. And I'm not sure if they're happening in the elementary school yet, but certainly the middle and the high schools. But I think you naming the fact that we need it younger and younger is important. And I don't know, Julie, if you know the answer to this, just going local, since that's where we're right now. There's a question about when the new county CSP PUF will open. Do you have it? Are you in touch with that in your role at the Central California Alliance for Health? I know Shayna's here. Do you have an update for us? We don't know. Okay, we don't know. Is there any county person here who can? Yeah, I thought so. What was that? 2 years. That's a long time. Okay, 2 years. Thank you. Summer 2025. Okay, we all heard it here. You're being held to it now. So there's a question that goes more into the therapy world, Julie, which is, how do I incorporate mindfulness in a therapy session with someone who is unfamiliar with mindfulness? Thoughts on that? And Mina, and anyone else is welcome to answer.
He just said, I'll let the professionals handle it. Actually, I think you might have some fun things to say. For me, I find it approachable, actually, first with breath, right? So it's funny, though. I say that, and I also balance it with, I've heard sort of teachers say, breath's not going to make a difference if the house is on fire, right? So but if you're sort of in a deeper, sort of thoughtful breath place, you might be able to get out quicker. So in terms of a therapy situation, the breath is the first accessible point. The other is, for some people, it can actually be very activating. So mindfulness can actually start by things like orienting. So I noticed even people coming in today, like you come, you find your space, you get your place. So mindfulness can take many different shapes and forms. And while not in the therapy office, I also find that for some, there are other practices that really work. So walking a labyrinth, actually even doing things like, to some degree, even like artwork. I watch sort of how people do it. So not having a limited view of what it means.
And I just wanted to add, there's a great resource from the Center for Contemplative Mind and Society called the Tree of Contemplative Practices. So if you Google it, there's so many different types of practices and pathways. And this kind of goes back to like really understanding your client, your context, your audience, your students, and just remembering there's many pathways to presence. Another offering, which may or may not land, again, the multiple pathways, is just sometimes I invite people to just, all right, focus in on a thought, hold that thought, whatever the thought is, with awareness. What's greater, the thought or your awareness of the thought? Now, for some folks, it might be the thought. That's my mom, especially if the thought has to do with one of her children. But I've noticed that with a lot of people, just inviting them to recognize that this practice is about strengthening the capacity of the observer, the witness, being able to witness what's unfolding internally and externally. And when we're able to name and have some space to observe, that can be really, really helpful in being able to touch into that wiser part of ourself.
Thank you. So we have a couple that are on the theme of working with sort of people who are not on the same, you're not on the same level with, or you don't agree with each other. So, for example, are there any suggestions for how to have compassion for those who you disagree with? And that seems like a particularly important question right now.
I have a lot to say on this, but I'm going to just start with just acknowledging that it's challenging. Just acknowledging that it's challenging. And what's been helpful for me is a micro just like me practice, but also I do a practice where I connect to the 5-year-old vision of the person who I'm struggling with. And what that does for me is it softens the edges a little bit. And it reminds me that inside of all of us is that child that has some unmet needs, that wants to be seen, that wants to be heard, and just remembering that we don't know the full story. We don't know the full story. And so that's something that's helpful for me, and also to practice baby steps, start with where there's some mild resistance first, but I think that's also where some of the curiosity comes in. We don't know the full story, and whatever we can do to kind of broaden our perspective is going to be really vital. And that doesn't mean that you're ultimately going to agree or be on the same page, but that small bridge could just be softening the edge a little bit, cultivating a little, a feeling of tenderness, remembering that inside, we all have that little child that has some sadness, has some hurt, and that, there's that saying, right? Hurt people, and love people, and to just remember that.
Thank you. How about, how would you recommend working in mindfulness or grounding with people with sensory challenges or sensory issues, or when the physical body is extremely uncomfortable or painful? Any thoughts?
I'm getting all the fun comments next to me. You need the hot mic? Okay. The comment was, I'll let you handle that. Let's see. Well, first I want to say that so often with pain, there's just such a, one, if you've ever experienced significant or chronic pain, it's hard to escape it. Right? So there is a place of really acknowledging that it can be completely debilitating. So in terms of the sensory situations, it's starting at the one place that is accessible. What are the one areas? And again, just sort of the small tender places. That's the thought I have.
Yeah, just adding, in a lot of kind of introductory practices, it's identifying like neutral, pleasant, unpleasant. and scanning. And so there's several practices out there, and particularly I think in relation to pain, but also recognizing, that there's different pathways, and people have to try and play with stuff and ultimately find something that lands and resonates. And I would just want to lift up again to check out the tree of contemplative practices, because there's a lot of different possibilities out there. I think that there's sometimes in like the clinical space of mindfulness, we have like this very specific view of like this practice for this. And so just being able to kind of widen our perspective of what might be nourishing for someone is really important.
Thank you. I'm going to turn again to Jeffrey and Niku. And for Jeffrey, there's a question. What was the most important thing that happened to you that helped you? That's a challenging one, but thank you.
So, in 2022, I'm already 1 year out working as a plumber, making my money in the construction trade, going back to what I know, working, hard work. That's all that was instilled in me in my community. Work hard, it'll pay off, right? But I wasn't really getting nowhere, and I always knew that education was the way out of the criminal justice system, if that makes sense, right, to decrease recidivism rates and all that. But I still didn't listen to my higher self, you can say, and I continued in the path. Then I got hurt. But before I got hurt, something that I never thought would happen happened unexpectedly. My uncle passed away, and I never thought, like, what? My uncle's dead, what? So I still couldn't fathom the idea that he was gone, that my dad's little brother was gone. So it made me think about like all my little brothers and stuff, and I asked myself, like, what am I doing to make a difference, to break the cycle? And that's when I decided to go back to school. And honestly, in all honesty, Cabrillo has been what has changed my life.
And do you hear that? You got it? You're loved. Yeah. So there's several questions for both Niku and Jeffrey about what drives you to do the work you do. Do you want to answer that first, Niku?
Sure. I don't think there's a singular thing that drives me. If I have to really dig deep into my memories, I think the first time that I, felt a need to make change and that drive was the first time I also felt the most helpless. And that was when I was a lot younger. I think when you're such a young child, I'm not that tall, I'm like 5 feet tall, so when I was around this age, when I was like 12, I was maybe 4 feet, 2 inches, small. People were telling me what to do, and I felt I just couldn't feel more helpless. And my parents were struggling, my best friend at the time was really struggling, and I didn't really have the vernacular, the vocabulary to express how I felt and what needed to be done, but I knew that I had to do something regardless. And yeah, I have to kind of draw back to that moment of kind of amid all that helplessness, feeling a bit of drive and a bit of power to go out and do something. And I think what continues to drive me is my community of peers at school, at Unite. I see each and every one of them doing really uncomfortable things for them, talking about mental health despite it being so uncomfortable. And I think that strength, that ability to do what's the most uncomfortable is what inspires me and continues to drive me to do this work.
For me, I have many drivers, my son being one of them, being first gen, being a rising scholar. But honestly, what genuinely drives me, I think, is the opportunity to provide someone the mental capacity that they are worth it, that they can do it. And I think being a prime example of that community that si se puede, that you can do it, it's really important that, how would I say it? I like a little brain fog right now. Can you repeat the question?
What drives you? What motivates you?
Honestly, I want to see others like me more in places where I'm found. And I'm hoping that I will be that motivation or that inspiration to make them think of themselves, I can do it too.
So there are several questions also for the two of you centered around what do you want to see and what do you need? So what do you need from adults in your community?
I think, so I recently joined the board of the Depression Bipolar Support Alliance of California. And there's about 6 other people on the board, and they're all adults. And I'm 17 years old. And I've just never been part of a more fruitful community. I mean, we've been doing so much great work in creating support groups across California for youth, for adults, for seniors. And I'd love to see more of that intergenerational collaboration. I just think that, again, going back to this idea that mental health is universal, I think because it affects all of us, why not come together to make change and help our community prosper? So if I had to name one thing, it would be more intergenerational collaboration.
If I may piggyback off of that, yes, 100%. We need more of that. At Cabrillo College, we value student feedback because that's who we are representing. So when these elected board members or elected officials, right, are chosen to make decisions that will impact our lives, I think it's important to have a perspective from an individual in that community, and to be specific, a youth perspective, right? Me being at the Board of Trustees and being the only student, my perspective is different, right? Holding an advisory vote, hoping to influence one of those members, that means something. So if having a youth voice regarding mental health and everything related to that will definitely matter and could significantly impact change in a positive way.
Thank you. Niku, people are wondering, this person is wondering anyway. I'm curious too. How did you get so many other teens to join you? And with such you just said the whole country, and how many other countries? 24 countries?
23, yes.
23,
Yeah.
Okay. How did you do that?
Social media. Yeah, I think so much conversation about social media being bad, but here's just one example of it being good. It's allowed us to build a lot of community. And if I had to say one thing, it would be social media. There's no way that I could have reached 23 different countries without that tool. So that's the number one way. And I think youth bring in more youth. So just empowering them, collaborating with them, inviting them to your initiatives, kind of expands opportunity for youth in their respective communities as well.
Thank you. Great. So there are several questions here wanting sort of your top, this is for Mina and Julie, kind of your top practices or interventions when you're working with youth or at-risk youth. Could you summarize what your top 3 or most impactful practices? Doesn't have to be 3. Okay, you can think. Yes.
How about I can do one that you can do one?
Perfect. Thank you.
So top 3 practices, listen with non-judgment.
So I'm going to share a practice we actually did when I was in Oakland with high school students. And, so often social and emotional learning is it's done to students, not with students, and not, And so what we did is we actually gathered students and we had them identify what does a self-aware teacher look like, sound like, what in practice, what is a socially aware teacher. And so they came up with their own indicators for adults, and they ended up training our teachers and doing a training. And so I think it's really, really important. And that was probably the best training, better than any other training our office could have done. Because it was sourced, from the truth and reality of young people's lives. So I think that centering student voice in this work, and there's some school districts that are, implementing social emotional learning systemically, and students are on like the district implementation team. So we really need to, if this is ultimately in service of young people, we need to make sure that they are valued, not just part of the process, and not just symbolic youth voice, but authentic youth voice in this work.
Great, thank you both. And I want to end with our youth, since I think we all agree that hearing from youth and integrating youth in everything we do if we're serving youth makes sense. So what do you think is the most important thing to change in each of your school settings to improve mental health of youth?
Talk about it more. Talk about it more. Continue to talk about it and find ways to get people to talk about it. And hopefully at the same time, if there already isn't a space, create a space, a safe space for that.
I think that support should be available in a multitude of different ways, more than just, a school psychologist on campus. I think teachers are supporters. They can, empower youth and support their mental health. And I also think that students can help each other. I think there's a huge peer support movement with all of these school wellness rooms and peer support specialists. So why don't we actively engage our youth in curriculum that helps them help their peers? So, yeah.
So we made it almost through all the questions. There are 2 more that we didn't, but I think the people who asked them will forgive me. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
Jeffrey, Niku, Mina, and Julie. Thank you, thank you.
I'm so proud of you.